Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the special committee of the whole meeting of May 31st, it being 5:03. I'll call the meeting to order. Procedurally, I will ask if there are any conflicts or issues of concern for council. If not, a motion to adopt the agenda is presented and seconded. All in favor of adoption? Carried. We have two groups with us. Just before I call on them, I have a few comments that I wanted to make to kind of frame what we're here for today. I think I'd start with since we were elected in October, I think it's fair to say the most pressing comment, council, or pressing concern has been that of water. Community safety may be a second, but it's a distant second. Last year, we had record shortages of water resulting in states of local emergency that lasted over 100 days. We're in stage 4 restrictions and very close to going into uncharted territory of boil water advisories and who knows what else. Fortunately, the rains returned in December and we did not have to face the situation of having no water left in our alpine lakes. On April 21st, I was given a letter from the Seashelt Fire Protection District, better known to most of us as our Seashelt Fire Department, expressing views that are part of our agenda today. At our May 17th meeting, Councillor Alton Toth provided a notice of motion outlining various questions that he felt council should consider, and so as to bring this matter to the attention of the community at large. While council endorsed a more simplified motion, I agree that the questions raised in Councillor Toth's motion warrant discussion. I'm sure we all agree that water and the impacts of water restrictions and worse warrant our immediate and urgent attention. In my view, it's too easy to assume last year was a one-off situation and that things will be fine this year. Personally, I'm concerned. I think we're facing a challenging summer and I'd rather plan for the worst and hope for the best. Well, I hope what comes out of today is some real data and tangible ideas about our current situation, what each of you think we know, and how we can deal with our situation, and essentially where do we go from here? I know I want real clarity. What is the real story? What are the real concerns? What are the risks we face, and what can we all do moving forward? The end point of today in my mind is to educate and inform everyone. We need to identify solutions and develop contingency plans in case things don't pan out as expected. So with that preamble, I'd like to call on each of our delegations to make some opening comments. From there, I anticipate council will have questions, starting with Councillor Toth. And oh, you want to go before them? Oh, okay. Then following, I'll just finish this and yeah. Following our formal discussion, I see a big crowd, so certainly we will entertain questions afterwards, and I hope the delegation will stick around to help answer those questions. This is Mr. Monteith and Chief Pike, the floor is yours, but apparently Councillor Toth, the floor is yours.
Thank you. In the fall of 2022, I was part of the policy group of the EOC through the Sunshine Coast Regional District. And my recollection is that the SCRD pulled out all of the stops and did everything that it could in order to ensure water supply for the hospital and for firefighting flows, which included potentially putting the community on a boil water advisory and using alternative water sources such as Trout Lake. That's literally the reason that we have the increasing water restrictions that we do, to ensure that we have a continuing water supply for our community. The letter that was sent and that we've received and has been published publicly implies otherwise. And I wanted us to have a conversation about it, which is why my motion included inviting the chair and CAO of the SCRD here as well. I think that we need to have a frank conversation to combat some of the alarmism that's going on right now. And we haven't been able to have that conversation in a public forum until now. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So then that I'll call on the chair of the Board of Trustees of the Seashelt Fire Protection District, Mr. Ray Monteith, and Chief Trevor Pike. All of By the way, I'm sorry, I should have been introducing Chair of the Sunshine Coast Regional District Board, Leonard Lee, and Chief Administrative Officer Dean McKinley. So welcome and thank you all for being here. Folks, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today and address some of our answer some of the questions that you have regarding our operations and certainly happy to address whatever may be unclear in the letter that we wrote to you, which highlights some obligations that we have as Fire Protection District and Fire Department, and quite clearly articulates concerns that we had during the 2022 fire season. So my name is Trevor Pike. For anyone in the room that doesn't know me, I'm the fire chief here in Sechelt. And I think we need to be perfectly clear on one thing before we get started. There's two specific issues here that seem to be being addressed that aren't really related. And the first of those being the letter that was written simply as a notification to mayor and council of two specific concerns that we had, and I'll call them potential concerns. That was the main issue and the main reason that the letter was actually addressed to the district of Sechelt. The second here, which seems to have crept into this letter, even though it really does not, from our perspective, form up why the letter was actually written, and that is the EOC and the actual current conditions at the end of 2022, and the effects that had on firefighting or not. So I think it's careful as we move through today that we don't confuse the two issues. In my opinion, they're two different things. And so I just wanted to clarify that before we move on. I understand that, we were invited here to speak to the letter and explain the letter and answer questions in regards to the letter. And secondly, to answer the questions sent to us on the notice of motion, which we are definitely prepared to answer. However, having said both those things, as far as the operational concerns or indifferences that occurred between our department, the EOC, or any of the equipment issues that were involved with that is a separate issue, and the department won't be engaging in those on this forum, as that's public forum is not a good place to try to iron out operational issues. But anything has to do with water, for firefighting purposes, anything that has to do with the letter or the motion, notice of motion, we are definitely here and ready to discuss those issues.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll go to the SCRD first, Mr. Lee.
First off, I wasn't quite aware of the extent of the information you were requesting. It seemed clear to me that we were talking about the fire department's concern about adequate water for firefighting, and that's why we were here. Would be prepared to talk about 2023 and any additional measures we put in place to improve it. But that's about what I'm prepared to talk about. Unless my CAO knows more about this than me, I'll let him answer.
Very happy to be here. Happy to answer any questions. Since the letter was provided, we've had a couple of opportunities to have good conversations between ourselves and Chief Pike and Chair Monteith on the status of the availability of water for fire both last fall and some of the measures that the FCRD is taking to increase the supply of available water for this year. I think we've recognized that there are opportunities to communicate better together and to collaborate better together. And we've had an opportunity to share some of the concerns we had on some of the statements that were in the letter and clarify those. And I look forward to working closely with Chief Pike and Chair Monteith as we move forward, recognizing that 2023 could be another challenging year where we once again have to pull out all the stops to make sure that we're ensuring that there's adequate water available for the most important things, which are ensuring there's enough water for fire protection and enough water for the hospital.
Thanks. So, okay, maybe we'll just go to questions, council. Please, Councillor Shepherd.
Just a question on the process, the content of the letter. I'm assuming that in 2022, the fire department was meeting with the EOC committee, the SCRD over the wattage as we go through the stages. So in terms of the sort of concerns expressed in the letter, all these were being dealt with in late 2022. Would that be correct?
You directing that to the chief?
Chief, yes.
Refer to you guys as the chief.
So like I stated earlier, the EOC, the dealing and our dealings with the EOC were separate from our concerns that we identified in the letter written to the District of Sechelt. The District of Sechelt letter was solely based on our concerns with our fire insurance grading being reduced due to potential inadequate water for firefighting purposes or lowered pressures in the system to fight fires. It had nothing to do with the EOC. The second issue that was outlined in the letter was my specific concerns about having adequate fire during the drought months, the hot months, to fight large scale fires. And we're not talking about small day-to-day operations. We're talking about urban interface fires, downtown core commercial structure fires, those type of fires. That was a concern because we were up until that date of the letter was written, unable to really get proof from the regional district that there was no potential to run out of water, or at the very least have reduced pressures in our systems that we would typically have that would make our firefighting operations a lot more effective. So for any fire chief, that's going to be a legitimate concern. So that's the purpose of the letter, not the EOC, not the backup emergency water supply, not the request that we put in for equipment. That is, again, like I said, a separate operational issue.
If I could clarify something, I just want to speak to and just clarify for anyone who we keep referring to the letter. I don't know if everyone has read the letter. The letter was really procedural. And for people who may or may not understand, the Fire Underwriter Survey is a data gathering body that provides information to the insurance community in Canada, to insurance carriers. The letter outlines the grading methodology and the grading system, the public fire protection classification, as well as the dwelling protection grade, and identifies the fact that Sechelt in the hydrant protected areas enjoys very good grades for the type of community and the type of service that it supports. If it's incumbent upon our fire department and the fire protection district to notify Fire Underwriter Survey of any material changes in our ability to provide fire protection services. So for example, as many of you may know, we have recently replaced two major pieces of apparatus, our engine and our tower. As we were doing that, equipment ages out of being viable firefighting equipment after a period of time. We had a lapse in the time between our engine actually aging out and the replacement of the engine. And we notified FUS of that concern. And that was part of our correspondence with them. As the letter outlines, our initial grading was completed in 2008. There was a minor revision in 2017, and then the 2023 notice had to do with replaced apparatus. So it's incumbent upon us to notify the Fire Underwriter Survey of any material changes in our ability to provide fire protection services. Fire Underwriter Survey can then act by noticing the underwriting community of any concerns and any need to downgrade our rating. Water for firefighting services accounts for 30% of the FUS grade. As we experienced in 2022, our chief and department had concerns about availability of water. We asked some questions to EMBC about the potential impact of that and whether we would be under obligation to communicate our concerns to the Fire Underwriter Survey. That communication was directed then to the Fire Commissioner. The Fire Commissioner then referred to Fire Underwriter Survey, and they responded saying, yes, a community with a significant change should notify Fire Underwriter Survey. That's the content of the letter. That's exactly what we wished to communicate, was that we had that concern and that we wanted to let this group know that the community that we provide fire protection services to, that there may be some inability for us to provide the level of service that we have historically been able to provide, and which has provided us with a grade of 3 commercially and a grade of 3A residentially. So that's what that was about. Conversations about EOC and all of that are not germane to the contents of the letter. The letter was really designed to notice the mayor and council of Sechelt District that the fire department had a concern about being able to fight fires according to the standards that we had previously and historically demonstrated.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'd add to that, my concern. I had the occasion, council, to fly up over Chapman Lake and Edwards last week and all the way to Coahome for those who are interested. But it's bleak. You know, I'm no expert, but there's snow on the lakes, but there's really no snow around the lakes. So I think it's right for us to be aware, and I think that's what today is about. The public needs to know. Unless we get regular rain on a regular basis, we're facing a tough summer. Councillor Toth.
Thank you. You mentioned having had to report to the underwriters before that equipment was sort of aging out. Obviously, it didn't affect our insurance ratings, or we would have known about it. But how does the underwriters group respond to those notifications? What does that process look like? Is it an implement a plan to mitigate the problems, or is it a thanks for letting us know, go to hell? And then the follow-up to that is, what sort of changes would homeowners, business owners see in their insurance rates if the classification were to change?
So within the 3A, so first off, Fire Underwriter Survey is a collaborative organization which would not diss us in that way. They're very interested in fire protection across all of Canada, and are interested in updating and maintaining up-to-date information. And they have an arrangement by which updated information can be provided. The Fire Underwriter Survey knows this department. They know our equipment. They had no concerns about the apparatus that was aging out, knowing that that it was in excellent condition, that it still had maximum pumping capacity. All of those things that Chief can speak to in much more detail than I can. So there was no implication to the grading at all. So, and it's not up to us to say what fire underwriter survey would or would not do. What they may do and what they indicated was that they may just simply provide some notice on our file that the underwriting to realize that for some percentage of the year, we don't have quite the status of water supply that we do during the rest of the year. So there may be some implications to that. Potential implication is a slight reduction in our grade. Worst case scenario would be a severe reduction, but I don't see that as being at all likely. There might be a slight reduction that would possibly reduce us to a step down in our current grading. The fire, just the last part of your question, fire underwriter survey grades are typically referenced by insurance underwriters to set rate for fire protection coverage. So at sometimes all that the insurance community does is identify whether there's proximity to a hydrant. They don't evaluate whether there's water in the hydrant. That's what fire underwriter survey does, and why the insurance community relies on them. So, assuming that there was some implication, fire underwriter survey would reserve the right to simply put some type of notice on our on this community's fire grade.
Please.
So, okay, so it's not an if this, then that, if we slip a grade in the fire underwriters grading, it doesn't mean we're gonna see a 15% increase in our
No.
fire premiums. Things
No,
like that.
nothing like that. No, and there is no intent to be alarmist in any of this. That was never our intent. Our intent was to alert mayor and council to the fact that there is a concern regarding our ability to provide fire protection services to the best of our ability, period.
Thanks, Councillor Rowe. I saw your hand out of that corner of my.
Good peripheral vision. Thank you. Thanks for attending today. A large majority or large portion of the letter that was sent was really informative and spoke to a whole world that I had no idea about. So I thank you for that. I guess my curiosity and perhaps what could lead to some confusion is I would have potentially expected to receive a letter like that when we were in the midst of it. So what sort of process led up to that letter being sent? Was it like an annual review, or if so, then is that done routinely, or sort of what triggers that? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. We have, the board of trustees certainly monitored the situation and the concerns that Chief Pike was expressing at our regular monthly open meetings of the board of trustees. And we were monitoring the situation, and as the situation continued to progress into November, we at our regular meeting of the board in November really expressed what we felt was a need to communicate our concern. And you'll note that the letter very clearly states that should drought conditions reach some continue to be concerned. So we were 2022 by then was over. We were still in some serious circumstances around about the time of the November meeting. So the board undertook that we would write that letter and that we would undertake to write that letter within the first quarter of 2023 based on our concerns as evidenced in 2022 and concerns for 2023, which we hope are not a repeat of 2022.
Thank you. Counselor Bell, please.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you again. Then thanks for coming out. I do have questions around, really around more the brief history of the fire protection district. Being new, I don't know a lot about it. So that would be one of my questions, and just if you can give me a bit of history around how you started.
Sure. Well, Seashell Fire Department has been, been providing firefighting services for 78 years now, Chief. And and the Fire Protection District was first incorporated in 45, and then letters patents were reviewed and reissued subsequently. Again, in 66, and so the Fire Protection District formed and has been in providing service to this community for a considerable amount of time.
Oh, okay, thank you. And who do you report to?
Who do I report
No,
to?
the district, the Fire Protection District. How does that work in terms of process? Who do you report to as a body?
So the Board of Trustees is a publicly elected board. Similar to you, similar to the Regional Districts Board. We're a form of government, just like you. So they don't really report to anybody. They're the top of the chain. I report to them. So from an operational perspective, it's my job to manage the fire department, all aspects of the fire department, finance, operations, training, fire prevention, public education, the whole thing. Below me, I have officers in each of those positions who report to me, and then I in turn monthly report up to the Board of Trustees.
Okay, great, thank you.
So technically, as you do, we report to the public.
Okay,
Seashell
report to
Independence.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask? I don't want to hog the mug, but again, I want to acknowledge that you expressed your concerns, and it did come out in a letter, but let's move on from that is what we're doing. What I was happy to hear is that you have met with the SCRD, and which is great because, in the situations that we're in right now, whether it be water, whatever it may be, we're in a situation where we all need to work together across the region in terms of governments and so on, and more collaboration, because we can't do this alone. So I'm very happy that you got together and had a chance to talk about that. And communication is really, really critical in this, which brings me to a question that comes to mind and doesn't need to be answered. I just want to flag it. But one of the things that keeps me awake at night is what is our emergency preparedness plan, and where are we at with that? And I'm sure we're at different places with it. I'm not asking for what that plan is, but I just want to flag that because for me, it's really, really important, not only as a resident, but also as a council member, that I feel confident that I can support my community when we know that. So I just want to encourage us to continue these conversations, and that perhaps there's a time that we can be talking about something like that, and what process we're in, what part we're in, and how we can start to engage our community in that. Thank you.
Great. I'm wondering if Mr. Kinley, do you want to comment on the EOC and the process? It's a lot like Mr. Lee, but
Sorry. I'd like to, I do have a comment, actually. I see some good things coming out of this. I've got to meet my partner in the improvement district. I hadn't met him before, and we've got open communications now. I've got to know the chief a lot better. He had some concerns that I wasn't aware of, such as we do have regular reports in our board meetings where we outline how much water is, the volumes, all those kind of things, where we are with whether you got less stuff left or not. But the chief did point out to me that there's no way he's going to monitor all those, and he'd like a much more concise report. And what I took away from it is that the district had communicated to the public, and we thought to all of our fire departments that there was sufficient water available, quite a structural fire at all times. There was always enough water to refill the appropriate local water storage tanks. there was enough water in reserve to continue the protection until at least December, which was well past the expected date of significant rain events. And the SCRD had issued a news release that was repeated in the Coast Reporter saying exactly that. And it was very specific. It says there was enough water for hospital, essential residents, use, and fire until at least mid-December. I think where we did not serve our fire departments well is we didn't say what the volume was and how much was left. And I think it's a takeaway that I took from the meeting. And I think maybe we can do better in the future. But that's my thoughts. Perhaps the CAO, he knows more about it than me, actually. He should have been talking.
No, I appreciate your words as always, Chair Lee. What I would add to that is one of the learnings here is the letter itself. There's as we talk about it now, they're expressing concern. And if we were to review the letter, and the letter, as the chair and the chief stated, was not intended to land us all here today, sitting at this table, having a discussion about this. It was to express concern. And I think there's probably some wording that was used in the letter that if they were to write it all over again, might be revisited. There's a difference between the word concerned and the word compromised. And one of the things I would like to point out that I'm incredibly proud of the team that worked so hard last year through the EOC is in an unprecedented drought for a second year in a row during a state of local emergency, working with crews and consultants provided by the province. We were tested as we've never been tested before on November 7th, I believe. In the height of that drought in stage 4, the Sechelt Fire Department had to battle their largest fire of the year. There was adequate water to fight that fire, and the next day, all the reservoirs were refilled to fight another if it had occurred. If there was ever a test of whether or not the purpose for stage 4 was successful, the reason we called it, the focus we put on it, the closures we did to businesses. We turned off water at many hours of the day to campgrounds that people needed water, and we had to work with them to make sure they could get a bit of water sometimes. And it was all in case the hospital needed it or in case there was a structural fire. And there was enough water. I'm incredibly proud of it. There's many things we're doing as local governments on the Sunshine Coast, Sechelt, Shechelle Nation, the SCRD and Gibsons to ensure that we've got more water this year than last year. And we're working really hard. And the District of Sechelt is in many ways leading the charge on making it really clear how important getting more sources of water are to make sure that this year isn't quite as dire as last year. I look forward to working more closely with the Sechelt Fire Department. Clearly, we have opportunities to improve our communications, but I'm incredibly proud of the work we did last year. There's a reason for stage 4, and we got tested and we proved that we could deliver water when it was needed the most, when it was the most scarce. And I feel like we're in a better situation this year than we were last year.
Thanks. Council, other questions? Councillor Toth.
Thank you. I understand that the SCRD fire departments and the Sechelt Fire Protection District have mutual aid agreements to help if there's a fire in one jurisdiction or another. And I think that is sort of, a bare minimum of what our organizations should all be doing together. And so I'm just wondering, as we move forward through this, from this, is there more that we should be doing as, 3 local governments sitting in a room to work together to, improve communications, to make sure that we are all on the same page, so that we don't have issues that arise unexpectedly on any party's part. So I don't know if anybody wants to speak to that. But.
Is there a question?
I'll speak to that, Councillor Toth. Just to touch base with what's currently being done. The local fire chiefs meet monthly, and we discuss obviously operational challenges of all types, and one of those is water. And it's no secret that out of those meetings comes a lot of very valuable information. There's a lot of good input that comes in from the various different chiefs and stakeholders that attend those meetings, including SCEP. And so the basis of a lot of our emergency planning is kind of built at those meetings and then taken back to the respectful organizations, and that's where the planning process kind of starts. Is there room for improvement? Yeah, there is. And during our recent discussions with the regional district that we hadn't had up until just recently, one of the things we identified was a lack of communication between both of us. And that is the responsibility of us and perhaps the regional district as well to do a better job of communicating what we're doing to help the whole situation as a whole. But I think, right now where we're at the end of all this is the planning process is there. The Sunshine Coast Emergency Program is the organization that is responsible for building our disaster plan, which you mentioned earlier, Councillor Bell, and we didn't really answer your question in regards to that. But all the stakeholders that attend these Sunshine Coast Emergency Program coordinating meetings have valuable input. It's then turned into data and information that can be helpful in terms of building a good emergency disaster plan. So I think there's a lot being done right now. Could communications be better between our governments? Definitely they could be, for sure. Specifically between us, because we are kind of the one that's left out most often as a separate governing body. The regional district departments are a little more informed because they work under the umbrella of the regional district. So, the information that flows down from management gets to them, and it may not be getting to us. So there is some, and since our discussions have occurred, we've got a lot of new information that we never had before. Does it answer all of our questions or satisfy all of our concerns? No, it doesn't, not yet. But I think at this point, now that we are at that point where we're on a good positive foot now, and we're starting to try to move things in the right direction. And I agree with what Councillor Bell said earlier in terms of us all working together to try to make sure that we can do a better job and make this problem hopefully at some point go away.
Right. One quick addition to that, Councillor Toth, as far as what we as three levels of government can be doing, I think you raise a very important concern and an important issue, and which is part of why we're here and why we sent a letter in the first place. Because what we do need to be able to do is communicate directly, and everyone at this table is now talking. All of us here are talking about a greater level of communication. We have a combination career and volunteer fire department. The vast majority of the people that are holding a hose are volunteers serving this community. We need to know that when we send them into a fire situation, that they are going to have what they need to fight that fire. And that means we need to understand volumes and availability. And we've talked a lot about expressing that and communicating that. It's important for us to know that operationally. And we have talked a lot about increasing communicating that, and it's important for us to be able to communicate that to this body and any concerns that we have as far as that group that is responsible for providing fire protection in this community.
Thanks. Thank you. Councillor Inkster.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have a lot. We've had some good questions. We've heard a lot from the four people here on this issue. I'm just asking if we're nearing the end. I just had a question of the chief if we're nearing the end of this discussion?
I don't know.
You don't know. Okay,
But,
so how do you know?
You mean, okay, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. This is more of an operational question, Chief Pike, and so I know you mentioned at the beginning that you're not speaking to operational in this particular discussion. That's fine.
And I have no issues with answering operational questions as
Oh,
long
okay.
as it's not trying to,
Let's let Councillor Inkster ask it and then
Uh,
we'll.
Yeah,
decide
sure.
if we like it.
sorry, my
Yeah.
apologies.
Yeah, no problem. So I want to ask you in future if you're able to and willing to come and speak to us about interface fires.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
It's the single biggest concern that we have as a fire department here.
yes,
Not only in Sechelt, but right across the entire coast.
yes, great. So,
So it'd be not a problem to come and speak to that issue anytime you
Yeah.
want.
okay,
Yeah,
please
I
do.
I think we've seen some public gatherings of people were concerned about interface. And,
Yes.
it's probably a very important topic.
Yeah, Roberts Creek, but I'd love to have them speak in
Yeah.
Sechelt as well. Yeah.
Great,
Thanks.
Councillor Shepherd.
Just a quick question, it's operational as well, if it concerns this council. We're analyzing the efficiency of putting in a water at Dusty Road. Is that of use operational to the fire department? Is it
So yeah, I'm aware of the water source that you're speaking to. And I'll just say that it's of very limited use to us. It all would depend on the location of the event and whether or not there is an actual need to draw from the water source. Under normal circumstances, we wouldn't need to use it at all. If we were in dire straits and water was a major issue, and there was something close to the area that we could do potential shuttle runs from the water source that could assist us in our firefighting efforts, then certainly that would be something we would use. But understanding the dynamics of actually shuttling water from a static source to an active fire scene, it's a very labor intensive operation, and it takes a lot of time and effort to sustain the that water flow, or at least at an effective enough rate to extinguish fires. So although it's there and it could potentially be used, and it definitely would form up part of our backup emergency water supply plan. The chances of us using it would be minimal. And mostly because of location.
Not hearing any others, the word, I'll like, just since I've started, I'll talk, the word I've heard several times through this conversation is data. And I think that's what we haven't received. I mean, I'm curious, I don't have to answer this, but I think part of the going forward, the information that should be put out is how much water do we have left? We talked about that at the regional district. I'd be interested in knowing what an average structure fire, do you use 1,000 cubic meters, do you use 100,000, just so that we all elevate our awareness? Because ultimately that's what we're faced with this year and next, I fear, which is a very intensive, extraordinary effort to conserve. And it's not just stopping washing our cars and not watering our lawns. It's buckets for toilets and stuff. So, I think the more data people have, it'll promote their willingness to engage. They'll see a benefit of doing it because they'll see that they're able to reduce their drawdown, which helps us sustain ourselves longer. So data. Might hear me say that a few times in the coming weeks. Councillor McLaughlin.
Yes, thank you through the chair. Yes, I've been wanting actually to have like a dashboard that provides data that we can summarize and simplify and communicate this very important information. And I guess my question to you is to ask more like, what can we do to help you? For instance, I had a question about campfire bans. I noticed last year Sea Salt is quite slow in requiring campfire bans. And I wondered what do you put into your decision to make that call? Because it just seems to me the dryness of the landscapes and the soils right now is just unbelievable. So if you could just comment on that, please. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So what we do is the fire chiefs on the Sunshine Coast, when we put campfire bans into place, we do it all at the same time. And then we remove them all at the same time. So as to eliminate any confusion across the coast, because before that, we used to put campfire bans in whenever we felt it was necessary to put campfire bans in for our individual communities. And then what we found was, as neighboring communities, that made people confused. So we made the decision as a group that I believe in 2018 was when we started, that we would always put the bans in at the same time and always remove the bans at the same time. The other part of your question is how do we come up to that decision, and how do we know when to implement the ban and when do we know when to remove the ban? We work closely with BC Wildfire. Wildfire, they have the equipment and the expertise out in the bush that tells us when it's unsafe. So when they put their bans into effect, we follow suit. When they remove their bans, we follow suit. And because really that's the best case and best source of data that we have in terms of getting a good indication of what the forest conditions are really actually like. So we count on our
Thanks.
friends over at BC Wildfire to help us with that decision.
Mr. McKinley, you want to supplement that?
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. You mentioned data, and we agree data is incredibly important. And it's interesting. Some pieces of data we're good at. We know how much water we need every day to meet environmental flow needs, 17,200,000 liters a day. We know how much water we draw out of the Chapman system in stage 2, about 18 million liters a day. We know how much water we draw out of the Chapman system for people in stage 4, about 9 to 10 million liters a day, plus 17,200,000 liters a day. So even in stage 4, we're pulling about 27,200,000 liters a day out of the Chapman system through those siphons. The data we don't have that's incredibly important is the data in how much water are we losing to leaks. Well, we'll know when we get the water meters installed in Sea Salt, and that's going to be incredibly valuable. We figure that we're probably going to gain 30 to 40% of water availability through the installation of meters. But even when those meters are installed, we would typically lose, even once if you're doing an active leak fixing campaign, you're going to lose between 10 to 20% of your water every year to leaks just because of aging infrastructure. The data that's hard to describe and it's hard to make into a dashboard form is data related to climate change drought. And so one of the things we were trying to wrestle with was how can we possibly take something this complicated and turn it into meaningful figures that make sense to people that are accurate. And so what we did was our communications manager reached out to people that haven't been dealing with this critical problem for the last 2 years. He reached out to people that have been dealing with this critical problem for the last 10 and 20 years. So he reached out to the people that manage Lake Powell, and he reached out to the people that manage Lake Mead, and he reached out to the communities in California, to his counterparts that are in charge of putting together information for the public related to water availability during drought. And he said, guys, what can we learn from you? What can you share with us that we can share with our residents that will help them make sense of this? And the overwhelming responses he got back was, well, due to the incredible complexity at play, it's incredibly difficult to create understandable bite-size dashboard information to the public because it's so dynamic, it's ever changing, and you can't control it. And so through our best efforts to find what is that simple way to describe this, there's no simple way to describe a situation so complex. And it doesn't mean that we can't do better than we're doing, but we're biting off a very difficult task when we have so little control and there's so many factors at play.
Thanks, Councillor Shepherd.
Listen through the chair to that point. So what would be the best way for the public to stay on top of where we are? Because it's impossible to project how bad a drought is going to be, how long it's going to take. What's the best way for people to stay on top of the most current information?
You've now exposed the depth of a CAO's knowledge. We have breadth, we don't often have depth. I would say that we are providing very frequent water updates. We're going to be providing them, I believe, is it every monthly, bi-weekly? They're in the form of a PowerPoint presentation and a verbal presentation that's going to be live and saved on YouTube. We'll have information on where we're at with drought response, drought planning on our website, probably on our Let's Talk page. I wish I knew all the sources we're trying to get the information out, but it's something that we're working very hard to make sure people are aware of, and we know that we need to do better.
Just in a follow-up point, I mean, those are great. I mean, the information's coming on a monthly basis or semi-monthly basis. I can't help but think that public meetings as well would be a good initiative to go out into each community to host meetings. I think would be of help in conveying the message. Thank you.
I think that's clear from how many people have shown up today. Yeah, Councillor Inkster.
Yeah, thank you. Just to follow up my earlier request, can I ask you to ask the chief to come and speak to us, or do I need to make a motion, or?
I think he heard the question.
Okay, he's busy, and I would think committee of the whole is probably better.
It will have to
them.
be, well, it will have to be because Wednesday nights are when all your volunteers come and train and meet.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's correct.
Councillor Bell.
Going to add to Councillor Shepherd's earlier comment. Our community associations as well can be very helpful. They really want to have more opportunity to tell the story of what's happening. So certainly they are a great resource for us.
And getting the message out is about how whatever dire or what the plans are is important, but we also need the data on, there's a lot of things in play. We have now the EFN reduction has gone to the province. Am I right? Because that's in my mind, the huge, virtually immediate partial solution, if that can be approved.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to speak to that. So staff from the Sunshine Coast Regional District have submitted a preliminary application. I'm using my air quotes to the section head of the appropriate branch of the Ministry of Forests with a request to expedite an application to reduce environmental fish flows. Earlier in the year, last year, we had to do it on a weekly basis, supply week after week, provide a ton of data. But the reductions were coming at the time when the fish also needed it the most. We're looking at the opportunity now. Is there a way we could request the reductions earlier in the year when the fish need it, potentially where there's more water available, the fish need it less, and it allows us to hold more water behind the dam that can be released when they need it more. We submitted that preliminary application. The response we got back from the Ministry of Forests was since you work so closely with Fisheries and Oceans, DFO, last year on these approvals, we'd like to give them an opportunity to provide comments on your preliminary application that you could incorporate as you determine whether or not you'd like to submit a formal application for an EFN reduction. So that's from the bureaucratic side. I think it's also important to note that while we've received approval, again, air quotes, to maintain use of the siphons for stage 4 for the next 2 years from the Shishel Nation, we have not had the opportunity to engage in specific conversations about early reductions in EFN with the Shishel Nation. We do not have a comparable letter supporting an early reduction in EFN from the Shishel Nation like we do with the continued use of the siphons for the next 2 years. And I'm sure the province would put a lot of weight into support or not support from the Shishel Nation on early EFN reduction. So I would say that while we've initiated the process to ask, and we believe that it's an important ask, we do not have permission as yet.
Okay, thanks. Anything else, council? Then procedurally, I guess we will move to adjourn, and then folks, if you have questions, just to set it up, we'll just a few questions because we're on Zoom and we have to record it. Keep your questions short, please, because I'll probably have to repeat them so they're recorded in the audio. So with that, council, motion to adjourn with thanks to our 4 guests for being here and helping educate us on what is a well, challenging issue for this year.